I've always been fascinated with dystopian nightmare books, the oppression of the totalitarian government, the loss of individual freedoms, and having to serve as a gear in a cruel system that grinds you to paste for your efforts and greases the wheel with that paste. But it's the nightmare aspect of it I really enjoy, the inescapable reality, living in a world that would hate the reader so much that we are drawn in by this fascination, like it's some perverse, voyeuristic zoo. We are safe because of the glass, but we are only one layer of protection away from annihilation. And it's this proximity, this intimacy with danger that makes it so interesting. It's not the tales of overthrowing the government and saving the fallen world with your assembly line of teenage revolutionaries. It's the day-to-day lives that peek into the fantastic, the forbidden in times of indescribable tyranny. In 1984, seeing the main characters being happy and in love for a few fleeting hours a day was their battlefield. And it's a battle they lose spectacularly. But it's that spark of humanity they feel, the call for change, that being together in private bliss was the most impressive, revolutionary thing they could do, to try and be happy in a world that hates them. That is what makes it so engaging. Little struggles, relatively small stakes, but character-driven stories that explore how people live in these nightmares of human creation. And their adversaries, people seeming to be machine men, with hearts cold and withered and brains programmed with an ideology so twisted and fueled by disdain of the them. Formulaic, exact, and unable to bend on any matter. Their minds aren't a canvas always splashed upon with new colors and ideas, new perspectives and uneasy stories. No, theirs are dark and lifeless, a steel sheet onto which their terrible ism has morphed into this religion of subjugation. They are the system personified. They are a terrifying facsimile of a person. But it was always violent oppression, always the boot on the neck, the olive branch cut down by the bayonet. Fear and paranoia, hatred and propaganda, those are the common tools of oppressors. But what of the more sinister, more devious devices that are beautiful at a glance, but morph into something truly horrid once you look closer? In a world of strife, people will always revolt against their oppressors. It's in human nature. The rich take from the poor until the poor have nothing else left to give, and with nothing to lose, they take back. The downtrodden thrown out of public meet in secret, espionage and coordinate, bringing down corrupt governments and establishing new ones. The tools used by those who seek change and the countermeasures used by those who would fight for the status quo are as ever-changing as every person who fights for their own sense of responsibility and happiness. But there is a place where there is no strife, a world of peace, free love, and lifelong youth. No wars, no spouses, no disease nor parents, no waste and no repairs, no hatred and no love, no sadness and no responsibility. Every man, woman, and child has a place in this society, a place they adore in a world that science has built, where everyone belongs. Exactly where they belong. Let us explore together this brave new world. Published in 1932 by Aldous Huxley, Brave New World explores a rarely asked question. What would the world look like if everyone got what they ostensibly wanted? Where the people loved their work, there are no vices like alcohol or cigarettes. No one is lonely, as they are almost never truly alone. You are all that matter. You and society. Simply existing, being fulfilled, and doing what you love makes you an ideal citizen. And there are only ideal citizens. It is the year 632 after Ford. Henry Ford, one of the most notable pioneers of the assembly line, is brought to godlike status in this book. His sign is the Christian cross with the top cut off, forming a T in honor of his Model T car. The governments of the world have united into the world state. Their motto is community, identity, stability. We are introduced to our current dystopia with a tour of impressionable young scientists being led by the director of hatcheries and conditioning. Get ready for a lot of weird terms, by the way. He explains to these students in the first few chapters some essential details about this world they inhabit. Natural birth is no more. In fact, it is seen as a heinous, ugly, preposterous thing. Instead, human beings are test tube babies, but also far more than that. Conception is manufactured in what is called the Bokanovsky process, and they are far more efficient than nature would ever dare to be. This involves splitting the egg as it would with twins many, many times, resulting in dozens of fertilized eggs. Twins who are genetically identical. Up to 96 people can be gotten from a single egg. Eggs are gotten through ovaries voluntarily given up for up to 6 months' salary and the good of the state. Most women are sterile, but 30% are left fertile to keep genes from stagnating. How many people a single set of ovaries can give is up to 17,000. These mass-produced humans make up the foundation of this society, which is appropriate as they are the trodden upon lower class, much to their delight. The structure of this society follows a strict caste system. Alphas at the top, followed by betas, gammas, deltas, and epsilons. This system is not simply a cultural one. Physically, intellectually, aesthetically, and socially, the higher up the caste you are, the better you are in all of these. Alphas are tall, intelligent, and beautiful. They are heads of state, factory leaders, tops in their field. Betas help execute the limited vision permitted by the alphas in their society. More on that later. Physical dalliance between these two groups is common, but with lower groups is unimaginable. Gammas are workers of jobs that require some physical and mental skills that are often quite repetitive, and are the closest to regular people. Deltas manage jobs considered too boring or menial for the other classes. They and the epsilons are the mass-produced. Often entire factories filled with twins all having the same face. Epsilons are the untouchables, often referred to as semi-morons and disliked by the upper caste. So much so they dislike they aren't worth more chemically than the others. They cannot read or write and obey commands of betas and alphas. In a normal story, they would be the class that would rise up to take back some semblance of pride and humanity. But they would fight tooth and nail to keep that from happening, as would everyone in this world. And that is thanks to Hypnopedia. Hypnopedia allows for mass indoctrination of cultural values, so from the time they are born, the children of this world learn that they are glad for their place in it. We learn that these hypnopedic messages are enforced with a Pavlovian upbringing where, depending on what the child will be doing with their life, they are taught to love it and dislike distractions from it. We see a group of 8-month-old babies crawl across a room, pick up books, and touch colorful flower petals before the floor is electrified, and loud piercing wails from the sound system distress the children. This is done to dissuade these children, who are of the Delta caste, from learning to enjoy reading and to dislike nature. This will be done to them 200 more times to tie these reactions to them for the rest of their lives. This statement will be proven only too true later. Even as embryos, control over oxygen dictates how developed the brains will be, and whether they like hot or cold climates. These people have a purpose before they are even conceived, and they will be brainwashed into loving it. The group end up outside, where we see children playing, frolicking naked and engaging in sexual games. They are being taught that multiple partners is the norm, casual love is a matter of course, and no attachments can be formed that are any more significant than with anyone else. They still play games, as sexual activity is just seen as any other game. It's nothing special. This world is so obsessed with consumerism that even the toys that children play with are made so elaborately they would require a lot of material to fix. The group is interrupted by the arrival of Mustafa Mond, a controller. He is one of only 10 controllers who are the rulers of the world. He tells the students a brief social history of how there are no homes or families anymore, which some of the students don't even recognize as words. But upon the mention of mothers and fathers, things take a sullen turn. The term parents is antiquated and gross, and a father is seen as some hilarious, obscene thing which you really shouldn't say. It's like if a person talked about how much they like scratching their own butt to a stranger. It's uncomfortable and maybe could even produce a few chuckles. But then the M word comes up. Mother. Mother may be the most profane word in this world. Its implications and all its relative meanings are so heinous, they go beyond ever being the context of funny. To try and understand, imagine if a stranger came up to you and started telling you a story about a woman kidnapping a child and forcing incestuous ideals into their head. That they will never allow another person to touch them the way they touch them. They then proceed to tell you in detail how they exchange fluids with the child, forcing them to perform any amount of perverted fantasy, and that the child has no escape. That horror, that disgust, that can take many minutes to properly sink in, is encapsulated in this single word, usually meaning exactly that. We also learn about Soma, a drug that instantly gives happiness without any side effects. It is available to all castes, and is a cornerstone of the society by smoothing out any imperfections these people could have. It gives them relief, patience, contentment. If you are in anything less than a happy mood, Soma is the cure. It turns your frown upside down. How the controllers, directors, and society treat and expect their people to live can be summed up thusly. Interspersed throughout this speech, we meet Lenina Crone, a fairly typical New World woman who is going on a date with Henry Foster, a very typical New World man. We see what the average date is like before they retire with each other for the night. They play obstacle golf, one of the few recreational activities available, where they hit balls that always magnetically find their holes. Everyone wins, no one loses, it's pointless, and everyone loves it. The people of this world are vapid, mindless consumers. In some ways, they are even less than livestock, since they don't even get to reproduce. But there are some roughs in this diamond, such as our short wannabe king, Bernard Marx. He is an Alpha Plus and a psychologist, heading the Hypnopedia department, and finds he is disillusioned with the life presented to him and his peers. He likes Lenina, but hates how she, and through her, women in general, are treated in society. He wants to take Lenina to the Indian reservation. This is a Native American reservation, but as was the parlance of the time. It's only wrong by about 8,500 miles. Before Lenina goes off on her date with Henry, she tells Bernard that she would go on the trip with him, despite Bernard being an outcast on account of his antisocial behavior, unattractiveness, and below average height. Bernard meets his friend, Helmholtz Watson, another alpha, as they talk about their lives. Helmholtz is an emotional engineer, a New World artist who creates things that are the same as what is already out there, but new. He tells of something in his body yearning to get out, to be expressed in his work. Bernard, however, is very self-centered and mainly grieves about the injustices done to himself, omitting his cowardly ways of not speaking up for himself when he is bullied by Henry Foster, and boasting that he did in a lie Helmholtz sees through. Afterwards, Bernard attends a solidarity service to try and fill a hole he feels inside. The solitary service is meant to fulfill religious or spiritual needs, to believe in one greater than oneself in a person, not a system. They are taught to see Henry Ford. Upon seeing this, they commence an orgy-porgy, which is exactly what it sounds like. Despite it all, Bernard feels more empty in himself than ever. When Bernard goes on a date with Lenina, he attempts to be himself by telling her all the things he dislikes about wasting time on pointless games. Lenina, finding him to be in a bad mood, offers him Soma. He doesn't take it, saying, Later, Bernard hovers his helicopter. By the way, the upper caste travel by helicopter. Over the ocean at night, away from the city lights, and looks at the moon. Lenina, distraught by this non-consumerist activity, attempts to turn on the radio, but Bernard insists on looking at the moon together. No noise, no distractions. As he stares at the moon, Bernard confides this. This makes Lenina break down in tears, crying over Bernard's oddness. Bernard relents and takes her home. When she tries to bring him to her bed, he resists, wanting to stave off instant gratification for something of more substance, to see Lenina as something more than a piece of meat. When she responds to him with nothing but hypnopedic responses, he laughs, takes Soma, and beds her. The final thing needed for the reservation trip is a signature from the director, which Bernard gets. During this, however, the director reminisces on his time there 20-odd years ago, when he was there with a woman named Linda who got lost. He searched for her, but to no avail, and, telling no one, has never forgotten about her. Bernard sees the sorrow on the director's face and is actually jealous for it. The director catches himself, realizing he was guilty of reminiscing, which is bad, and overly attached to another person, which is even worse. As such, he threatens Bernard with transference to Iceland for his antisocial ways. Bernard, afterwards, is shown for the first time actually happy. He feels like he's being seen as he sees himself, a rebel against the system, or at least a thorn in the lion's paw. He doesn't think this threat will result in anything. With everything prepared for, Bernard and Lenina head for the reservation. There's actually a pretty funny scene here. Upon meeting the warden, who gives them some information on the reservation, Bernard is quietly stressing about having left the faucet on in his hotel room, and how expensive it will be. And Lenina took some Soma recently, so both of them are nearly ignoring the tour guide, who is trying to shock or impress them with disturbing facts and words. But Lenina is too chill to care, and Bernard is calculating the cost by the liter how much it will cost him. It's a really fun scene to read, and it's capped off with Bernard finding out from Helmholtz that the director is going ahead with the transference. Bernard is dumbstruck, and is mad that he never got the chance to prostrate himself and beg for his job, which he admits without any shame he would do. He takes 4 somograms to chill out. He is a lot of talk, but little conviction. Big ambitions and ideas, but no guts or follow-through for when the going gets tough. In the reservation, it's filthy. There are old people and women breastfeeding. Lenina is uncomfortable with all of this, with Bernard trying to put up a front like he is totally fine with it. They observe a ceremony where a man is whipped while religious imagery and drums are being played when along comes John. John, unlike all the Native Americans here, is white and blonde. He is young and handsome and speaks often in Shakespearean poetic verse. John and Bernard feel a kinship towards one another as they are both outcasts. Also, it turns out, Linda, the director's lady friend who got lost over 20 years ago, is alive and was against the odds pregnant, forced to give birth and raise John alone in isolation as she is hated by the indigenous community. Not for a bad reason, mind you. She sleeps around a lot, as is her custom, but as such the women of the reservation beat her and John is considered a whore son with no father. He wasn't accepted by the kids because of his mother's proclivities and the rags he wore. This is because Linda hasn't changed despite the decades she has been here. She still thinks of the natives as savages and less than her, and refuses to adapt her ways. She doesn't know how to mend clothes because one of the hypnopedic phrases embedded early on is, "Ending is better than mending." As such, John grows up alone except for his mom, who is often depressed and doesn't leave bed for days. With one exception, Pope. Pope is a native man who Linda is often seen throughout the years being in bed with, and John hates him, despite the fact that Pope gives him the Shakespeare book he loves so much, going so far as to stab Pope in the shoulder while he slept. But Pope isn't even mad at him, actually laughing and calling him brave. This might be the first positive thing an adult male role model has told him, and it's for acting out in violent passion related to sex. 1 second here, I gotta move, I'm in the foreshadow. When Lenina sees Linda, she is horrified by her aged looks, despite the fact she's only in her mid-40s. With backstory told, Bernard proposes that John and his mother come with him to the New World. He accepts, but not before laying eyes on Lenina. John feels like it's love at first sight, and Lenina finds John to be quite handsome. They all journey back to London to confront the director in the hatchery. Before Bernard can be transferred, Linda comes before the director, calling herself his Linda. She hugs and kisses him, causing an uproarious laughter and embarrassment for Tomakin, the director's name. But when Linda says, this scene turns from a comedy to a horror. This decrepit creature, fat and in rags smelling of filth, is a mother to the director's child, no less. When John comes in, breaking down in front of Tomakin, calling him, "My father," over and over again, the audience cries out again in laughter before Tomakin leaves the building, his job, and this book, never to be seen again. John is brought here to study his reactions to the way life is in the New World. So he'll be brought to factories, functions, and feelies. But before he can, his mother Linda is put into a self-induced soma coma, where she is taking ludicrous amounts of soma to be ecstatically happy. So much was she longing for soma after years of drinking alcohol and hating hangovers. But this amount will overpower her nervous system, and she will die within a month. John laments this sudden development, but is powerless to do anything as it is what Linda wants. John experiences much of the New World, from flying machines to assembly lines, but always comes away with a worse opinion of the place than he started with. Throughout his childhood, Linda told him of this place. It made it seem mythical to him, so he made it mythical in his head. So when the limitations of reality are shown to him, he is often disappointed, like when he finds the fastest a plane can go is 1,200 kilometers an hour. Or if he isn't simply disappointed, he is horrified by the mass-produced epsilons and deltas, the way they are treated and the lives they lead. Upon seeing Lenina for the first time back on the reservation, John says the line for which this novel is named after, from Shakespeare's The Tempest. He says it once again here in the factory, looking upon the same-faced semi-moron epsilons ironically, disdainfully about the reality of this world. He goes to an Alpha Plus school, where all kinds of conditioning and hypnopedic responses are shown to him, the process that makes everyone in this world the same. Seeing religious imagery mocked and laughed at, John is bewildered and confused. Upon Bernard's request, Lenina takes John to a feelies. Having a better understanding of the values of the world, John tries to keep Lenina at arm's length emotionally to keep her sacred image in his mind true. There, they experience a film where they not only see and hear, but smell, feel, and even taste what is happening. A film where a black man and a beta woman are kissing, and John is amazed he can feel the sensation. But the film quickly turns into a beta woman being saved from a savagely black man by 3 young alpha men who then proceed to have sex with her on a bearskin rug. The crowd loves it, and John is incredulous at what he saw, finding the film as simplistic as it was horrible. He taxis Lenina home before leaving for his abode. So offended by what he saw, he seeks a more nuanced, tragic love story to calm his indignation. Othello. Again with the lighting in this place, there's foreshadows everywhere. Since John's arrival, Bernard has been living the high life, enjoying women and being listened to by his peers without interruption or challenge. They secretly despise him behind his back and hope for his downfall, which comes soon since John has a problem. With everything he has been experiencing lately, John cannot bear with going to a party hosted by Bernard, which is unfortunate, because it's Bernard's biggest one yet with celebrity guests. Lenina awaits John at the party to talk to him about some odd feelings she has been having, but upon the news that the savage won't be making an appearance, Bernard is given a proper tongue-lashing by the upper crust, and his reputation, as fragile as it was, is in tatters. Lenina is whisked off by a celebrity to spend the night, and she is oddly distracted during the whole thing. John meets Helmholtz and they bond over poetry they made, much to Bernard's discomfort and despite his interruptions. The three become friends quickly, and John expects Helmholtz one night, but is surprised to find Lenina. Lenina, upon talking to her friend Fanny, takes her advice. Unfortunately, this goes very badly. Forced to confront who Lenina is, John pours his heart out to her, telling her he loves her and tries to make her understand what that means. Confused and thinking John is speaking gibberish, Lenina strips naked and kisses John. Initially delighted by the embrace, John suddenly throws her to the floor, calls her a whore, and smacks her on the shoulder as she runs to the bathroom in terror. As John paces the apartment, he is called away to the hospital. His mother is dying. John watches over his mother, remembering childhood memories of her singing to him. Linda, in her last moment with John nearby, looks at him and calls him Pope, much to his dismay. He shakes her, desperate to be acknowledged before she dies. She calls out to him by name one last time before succumbing to death's embrace. John, mourning her loss, is told to control himself by the staff, as a group of identical children are there to learn that death is nothing to be troubled over. His grief turning into violent indignation, John storms out of the building, happening upon a group of deltas receiving a ration of soma, takes it, and seeks to throw it all away. Helmholtz and Bernard arrive and see the scene, John holding off a legion of deltas as he throws piles of soma out a window. Helmholtz joins him in the fray, while Bernard, racked with indecision to join, alerts police nearby of the event. Once the situation is calmed, the three men are taken into custody and are brought before Mustafa Mond for judgment. Mustafa Mond talks to them for a bit, explaining the reason behind how controlled the system is and why it cannot allow such rampant individualism in it. I'm not going to delve too much into it. It's incredible and beautiful, and you should definitely read it. Helmholtz and Bernard are sentenced to remote, separate islands to live out the rest of their lives. Bernard takes this with even less dignity than you'd expect, leaving Mustafa Mond and John the Savage to have this incredible debate. As it's revealed, Mustafa Mond is actually quite knowledgeable about the works of the past. From chastity, religion, God, and sin, they debate the values of them, their value to society and to the people. Despite his best efforts, John cannot make a single point against Mustafa Mond that can hold in this society. Mustafa decides John will continue to be observed as he was before. The experiment will continue. Later, John decides enough was enough, that civilization was too evil for him to be a part of. So, he exiles himself to the countryside. While living out at a lighthouse, John puts together a bow and finds he is singing to himself as he does so. Disgusted with himself, he self-flagellates and decides to hate happiness in any form, wanting to clear his mind of the impurity of civilization. His isolation doesn't last long before his location is discovered, and hundreds of people come to gawk at him, chanting for him to whip himself so they can enjoy the spectacle. Enraged and pacing like a cornered animal, a helicopter comes down piloted by Henry Foster and Lenina Crone. Lenina approaches John, trying to talk to him, but cannot be heard what she says over the crowd and the helicopter. In a final explosion of violent rage mixed with sexual repression, John starts whipping Lenina. As the crowd watches, they start to mimic him, striking at each other and Lenina on the floor before it descends into a violent, soma-fueled orgy. The next day, John awakens. Realizing he had killed Lenina, and then committed the same sins he had judged her for, also blaming himself for his mother's death and the utter isolation he feels, John goes into the lighthouse and takes his own life. Bernard Marx is an idealist, hypocrite, and a coward. He is an Alpha Plus, yet also an outcast despite his high social ranking. He is short and antisocial, dislikes the lower caste as they remind him of his short stature. All citizens have inbuilt correlation of respect to size. The larger someone is, the higher up the caste they were. Being an Alpha Plus while having the body of a Gamma caused Bernard to be bullied, which made him behave atypically, and the cycle continued. Bernard, being a hypnopedia expert, understands why society thinks the way it does, and often mumbles how many times someone has been conditioned to the phrases they utter reflexively. He goes to a meeting for which he was late, and when he realized he wasn't the last one there, he is ready to scowl at whoever is later than he was. He judges everyone for being more content with their place in life than himself, but as soon as he brings John back, he treats women like meat, just as much as anyone else had, as he would brag to Helmholtz about how many women he had had. He only speaks in public about his divergent views when he is in a position where he cannot be challenged or overtly judged. He wants to try to be different, but always folds and takes soma or sleeps with someone if things get too hard for him. He goes with Helmholtz to help John at the hospital, but cannot decide if he wants to help or not. He struts in front of the director, but as soon as he faces consequences, he wants to beg and ask for forgiveness. Bernard, perhaps because of his knowledge of the hypnopedic method, is amongst the most human of the people of the New World. Pathetic, petty, insecure, and with few redeeming qualities, he somehow still is somewhat endearing, like a cat that rips up the curtains and wakes you up in the middle of the night. Maybe it's because he is despised already by society that we feel for him. It must be hard to be so alone, so unable to communicate what you feel to anyone else. If given the chance, who might also do as he did? Despite Bernard ultimately being sent to Iceland, this may be the best thing for him. The New World has a place even for its dissidents, islands where they can communicate openly with other outcasts. What Bernard sees as his downfall may actually be his salvation. John lives a very sad life. He is isolated like Bernard, but never finds the love and affection he so desperately craves to both give and receive. His mother made them outcasts by virtue of her casual relations with the men of the reservation and her unwillingness to adapt, so they cannot accept him, as he is dishonored every day by his mother's actions. He is conflicted between his want to defend his mother and her behavior that makes his life so hard. He loves the idea of Lenina, the person like in his Shakespeare plays that can dedicate their heart and soul to one person, who can articulate the extent of their love to him and receive his in turn. John feels alone. He is the most lonely man in the novel, even more than Bernard. Except for a few instances of connection of mother and son, his relationship with his mother is one of love seemingly solely because of it being a parental one. Linda doesn't want to dote on John, she finds it perverse. So much so, John cannot even call her his mother. He has to call her Linda, or else she will hit him. He is subconsciously tied together expression of love and affection with violence. That's why when he is frustrated with Lenina, it's violence he shows. His world of expressive love is so shattered by his disillusion of Lenina and his mother's death that he forgoes any expression of love and even happiness. One of the only times we see John genuinely happy is when he is making a bow with Mitsima, a Native American elder. But near the end of the book, when he finds himself singing in contentment, at home in nature and enjoying the peace and quiet, he chides himself. When his mind drifts to sexual thoughts, he mutilates himself with a whip like a Puritan. He is so damaged, so broken by the world he is forced to live in, that he associates pleasure and love with failure and disappointment. And he ought to, as it is what his life has taught him. Linda and Lenina never gave him the love he so sought after, and he judged himself and them for it. John grew up an outcast and related a lot with Jesus Christ. When he was a young man, he prostrated himself like Jesus on the cross to try and understand him more. John sees a lot of Jesus in himself. His mother is among the normal people, but his father is in the New World, a place that seemed like heaven. John is a tragic figure, so trapped not only by his world, but his own principles of what it means to live and love. Like Linda before him, John refuses to adapt to the new environment he is put upon. His initial friendship with Bernard is damaged when Bernard shows himself to be self-serving and uncaring for John's opinions. Helmholtz is the only man John can discuss poetry with, but laughs in the face of the ideals that John cares so much about. Lenina not only represents the love he cannot obtain, but also the new world. It is beautiful, but shallow and uninterested in him beyond his good nature and looks. Pope he hates, yet it is never given a reason why, other than him sleeping the most often with his mother. Pope, who John assaults, never hurts him, called him brave and gave him Shakespeare, yet John still hates him. I may be going out on a limb here, but this book is very influenced by Pavlovian and Freud psychology. The civilization has conflated Henry Ford and Sigmund Freud into a single person, so I wonder if there was an Oedipus element to John's relationship with Linda. She is the only person who really cared for and loved him, conditional though it was. Seeing her give herself in a loving act to strangers, and over again to Pope, may have made John feel threatened. Like Pope was going to steal his mother from him, which is why he hated him so much no matter what Pope did. John the Savage is angry, repressed, and exemplifies many of the worst traits the New World sought to end. He sets up impossible expectations for himself and unrealistic expectations of others, and when all those people, including himself, fail, he finds life not worth living. Lenina may have the most tragic story in this messy affair. She seems to prefer the company of one man at a time, not dating multiple men at once, which is noted by her friend Fanny as extremely odd, even dangerous. Despite this, she only deviates from Henry, John, or Bernard once in the novel, and that is with a mega celebrity. But she is so stuck on John that she can't even enjoy the few simple pleasures life can offer her anymore. John brings these new feelings into her life that has destabilized her, made her want to talk about them with John, to explore them. Tragically, she will never get the chance. The men in Lenina's life keep disappointing her. Bernard is bizarre, John beats her and kills her, and Henry Foster abandons her to save his own skin. Bernard and John both blame Lenina unfairly for her actions more than any other character in the book. Bernard, when after his attempts to get her to think like he does, she retreats into her hypnopedic phrases and soma. John sees her as the living embodiment of the death of the romantic dream, of love, and hates her for who she actually is as much as he adores the idea of who he envisioned her to be. This is tragically ironic, as Lenina is the only woman in the story to question her conditioning, if not through her words, then through her actions. On her first date with Bernard, Lenina cannot stand the sight of the moon by itself. It makes her want to cry. She craves distractions. But meeting John and feeling a connection form between them that isn't just a build-up for a sexual encounter makes her retrospective, pensive about the way she, and by extension society, treats relationships. She stops on a rooftop, about to engage in another night of pointless sex, when this happens. Where she came on too strong physically for John, John came on too strong emotionally for her. His poetic phrasings and metaphors about love and the denial of immediate pleasure was confusing and made her regress into her comfort zone, hypnopedic phrasings, which really enraged John as he saw what small amount of humanity she had be swallowed up until he just saw a facsimile of her, a personification of the system in human skin. If Lenina had arrived to John at the end without the crowds, would anything have been different? Would she confess her love to him? To go further than any other in the world? To truly cast aside all for love? Or was she simply there to talk? To understand him and maybe even herself a little better? Tragically, we will never know. Helmholtz Watson is an exceptional man among exceptional people. He is an alpha, He excels at everything he does to the point where everything the world offers to him, the highest caste, doesn't seem like enough anymore. He is starving to express himself, which makes sense as he is an artist. He is an emotional engineer whose job it is to use the shallow amount of material he is given to twist it into something that is new yet old, innovative yet inoffensive, which Mustafa Mond praises him for doing. His friendship with Bernard seems to be because he is simply so different from everyone else, and he tolerates Bernard's unseemly behavior because he exhibits them at all. He enjoys John because he sees in him the more expressed version of the person he himself is trying to find. He forgives Bernard unconditionally after Bernard cut him out of his life because he is a good person. He is loyal, jumping straight into the fray to help John throw away the Soma. I believe Mustafa Mond sees a lot of himself in Helmholtz. Maybe even a look into the life he may have lived if he chose passion over conformity. Mustafa Mond is an enigmatic man, upstaging the director early on to give us more than the science of the New World, but some history and the culture that led to it. He is a philosopher simply to reinforce the society he is propagating. He chose a life of censorship over a life of discovery, and thanks to people like him, these discoveries will only be self-discoveries as the public may never know of them. He is the authority of the system personified. He is cool, calculating, and effortlessly retorts and wins every exchange John's passionate soul can deliver unto him. The human race is something to be monitored, contained, and controlled like livestock, never straying from a path of happiness and security being of the utmost importance. Notably, it is not human lives. His authority is so absolute, he doesn't have to abide by the rules he himself enforces. Mustafa Mond was once human, but gave up his humanity to become a slave to the system. He is like if Helmholtz had all the ability, the talent, and the drive, but none of the character. He knew the state of the world, what choosing to become the controller would mean, and how his life would be one of forbidden knowledge he must live with, keep secret with, and die with. He chose it, something he doesn't allow for anyone else in the New World. A man with a semblance of power to change things, to move society in a different way. The only way he was allowed to get into this position was because he would be exactly the same as the ones before him. He defends his system from John's words admirably, but this exchange, so much higher brow than anything else in the book, is indicative of the problem. That only Mustafa Mond could challenge John like this because he keeps all the knowledge and power for himself. He rejected his humanity. He chooses happiness over expression, security over freedom. He makes this choice knowing the full extent of his actions, what they mean and what they do to the world. And while he laments sometimes on the overindulgent pursuit of happiness, he is the foot on the throat of humanity. He is our introduction into this world, yet upon the most interesting thing that could happen to him, John and Linda entering his life, he exits the story. Maybe it would have bogged down the pacing, but I would have liked to seen more. He seems like a perfectly civilized man, groping women as he passes them by and making sure the children play their sex games properly. But the way he longed for Linda, in a world where death is nothing of interest, or at least thought of her, is interesting. His PTSD, the nightmares he would have about looking for her, show us a man behind the manufactured citizen. But he is also petty and vengeful, wanting any excuse to be rid of Bernard once he overshares. So much so does he dislike Bernard, he views his antisocial behavior to be worse than murder. Clearly, the all has swallowed the one. Not allowing John to call her mother, Linda refuses to adapt to her new environment. She won't learn to sew, to assimilate into the culture, viewing the others as savages whose ways are beneath her. Despite beating and beratement, she still sleeps around with married men despite knowing that society doesn't allow for that. She is, like most citizens of the New World, a collection of hypnopedic phrases and Pavlovian responses that develops a shallow personality. But because of the time she spends in the reservation, she has to either adapt or stagnate, and she does stagnate. Despite only being in her mid-40s, she is thought to have aged very poorly. She drinks a lot, is overweight, often depressed for days, and won't move. She always looks to the past and longs for it, trying to recreate it here, but only to her detriment. If she were open to change, to adapt, she could have had a much more fulfilling life, but she was stuck looking at the past. She couldn't look to the present, let alone to the future. She lived only to hope she would one day return to her promised land, and when she did, it made her so happy it killed her. I wonder if anywhere in her soma coma, she felt regret for leaving her lover Pope, or John to face civilization alone. But Linda was a product of her time, someone who loved herself more than anyone or anything else. Pope is a very minor character, but I feel he is worth a mention. It is often said that we don't know what we have until we lose it. Well, with Pope, John had a chance to receive some modicum of the love he was seeking. Pope liked John, gave him the book that would define his entire personality and worldview, treated Linda so well he was who she dreamed of as she was passing away in her sleep before John tussled her awake and she died suffocating. If John could see the good Pope did for his mother, what he did for him, maybe he could have had a father-son relationship, one where Pope helps him penetrate the barrier between John and the children his age. Unfortunately, we never know what becomes of Pope after Linda leaves the reservation. I wonder if Pope was sad when he heard they left. In the end, there are no heroes in this story, just complicated people living in a simple world. Some wish to expand it, others to simply live in it. No one is the paragon of virtue here. John is repressed and traumatized and takes his anger out on Lenina. Bernard is a coward and never truly grows the backbone he always says he has. The director is a vengeful hypocrite. Henry Foster is an even greater coward than Bernard. At least Bernard tries to be more than he is, even if he always fails. Linda refuses to adapt to the culture she sees as lesser than her, and beats her son for simply being her son. And Mustafa perpetrates the cycle by choosing stability over passion. The only two people that are worthy of praise are Helmholtz and Pope, both minor characters in the grand scheme of things. Helmholtz forgives Bernard for being such a jerk instantly, and actively fights the system by creating poetry. He is still stifled by the conditions he grew up with, but he is shown to be someone who will step up and help his friends when they need him, like he did with John in the hospital. And Pope, the enigmatic native. We never learn much about him, but he treats John so reasonably well, and Linda seemed to love him so much as she was capable of loving another person. This book is almost 100 years old, so trying to find out if Aldous Huxley was trying to send a message about the structure of society, or if it was simply unconscious misogyny or sexism on his part is hard to parse, but let's discuss it anyway. Sexism in this book is not overt. Men and women are ostensibly equal. There is no job that is said to be for women or for men, no situation more inclined to be masculine or feminine. I was looking for some examples, and I thought Bernard sharing his woes with Helmholtz was being seen as weak and lacking pride, maybe a sign of toxic masculinity, but it comes more from a societal standard of being happy and content with your place in life. This is further encouraged by the fact that a service akin to a religious ceremony happens where people come together who seem to have trouble being intimate with others for whatever reason. It isn't due to being a man, it's about being what you are. Men can be expressive, but women cannot be ugly and have extra responsibilities due to their sex than men do. Thanks to a Malthusian belt, which is something all fertile women must carry. They are responsible to make sure they do not get pregnant. They are given drills where if they are getting intimate even under the veil of soma, they will always take their pills. The men never check or worry about it, and if a woman is pregnant and gets an abortion, it's up to her and her alone. To further exemplify this point, Lenina's reaction to Mastima being old and Linda being middle-aged see her much more horrified at the sight of Linda than the older man. Linda is also overweight, which is the only time such a concept is brought up in the book, which Lenina and the rest of the society judges her for harshly. Linda, despite being a single woman, is the one beaten by the women of the reservation for presumably sleeping with their husbands. We never hear of the men being punished or reprimanded at all. The term mother is seen as almost blasphemous, an entirely disgusting subject to even speak upon, let alone talk about openly. Father, on the other hand, is talked about like a dirty word among schoolchildren. There is tittering and teasing and laughing around it. If a man is found out to be a father, he is a laughingstock. If a woman is found out to be a mother, she is a monster. A thing to be looked down upon. A thing to be looked upon with distaste, as Linda was thought not worthy of being seen by anyone during her soma coma, so John visiting her was thought to be very odd. Something I found upon closer inspection is that all upper caste men are alphas and all betas are women. I had to check this as it is never mentioned in the book, but it's true. There is no mention of this fact in the book, that it is a societal decision betas are taught to be subservient to them to a degree that they would never wander to another class. So the alpha male class keeps all the most intellectual and beautiful women to themselves, and indoctrinates them into wanting to be with them. Not that this is the alpha's fault directly, this is just how society is run. With this in mind, Lenina, who seems to prefer the company of one man for a length of time, being pressured by her friend Fanny to be more sexually diverse, can be seen in a much darker light. Women are conditioned their whole life to be open sexually and are judged for naught by other women. The women in this society seem equal, but there is still a systematic oppression keeping them from becoming leaders, to excel beyond simply executing a man's desires. They never want to become alphas, and if the upper caste women are always going to be betas, then women have found that they will never be truly equal to men here, that they exist to be pretty and work for men and not with them, to not look within themselves and consider their own feelings. The New World is a dark, terrifying place for women, and that's not all. A fun part to doing this section will be trying to, like the last one, divining what is social commentary and what is internalized racism from Aldous Huxley. The most obvious is the treatment of the people of the reservation being called savages. They are outside of the caste system, and while they are not hated, they aren't fully viewed as human. They are producing reactions from people akin to exotic animals. Going to the reservation, while only for the most elite and rarely done, can be looked at as like going to the zoo. They aren't going there to appreciate another culture, but to see the oddities of those they believe so unlike themselves. They keep the locals in this reservation in check with electrical wires and gas bombs. They are in a cage, a prison. The overseer of the reservation is referred to as the warden. The site is filthy, with litter abound, dead dogs near houses, and a mishmash of cultural and religious symbolism present throughout. They are the only signs left on Earth that there was art, organic culture, religion, love, and hate. Despite being referred to as Indians, as that is simply untrue, these are Native Americans. It was the phrase back then, but for a non-American like myself, it did make it a little confusing. They cannot be permitted entrance into the outside world because they are to be contained and controlled until the government musters the reason or resources to take over the land. What happens to the natives? Life is very cheap in this world, and since they pose a threat to the stability of their society if they joined, they would probably be simply genocided out of existence, all trace of their culture purposefully erased. It is only the extraordinary nature of John's existence that allows him to go to London. The issue of race in Brave New World is not overt either, but it is exemplary of what is considered beautiful. Thin, tall, strong people with no scars or blemishes. Those are the alphas and the betas. The lower caste could be seen as the non-whites of the time. When John goes to a factory to view its working, he notes many black, red-headed, dwarvish, and left-handed people. There doesn't seem to matter in terms of hair color, as while blonde is mentioned, John has blonde hair and he's considered handsome. So while black people are commonly associated with lower caste in this book, it doesn't seem to mean they are only in the lower caste. When John and Lenina go to a movie, they experience a tall black man kissing a woman. This is received quite favorably by the audience. Having him be tall means he must be at least beta, though again, all men may be alphas. Also, the only reason he becomes a villain is because of his actions rather than his physical appearance. However, John is not in the caste system and is seen as handsome, so perhaps this is meant to be a savage similar to himself? Regardless, the fact the most notable black character in the book is unnamed and is a villain which 3 young alphas defeat is of note, but it is an overt criticism. John is horrified by the depiction that Lenina so readily loves and must decompress from the experience by reading Othello, a story with a black hero. So, there is internalized racism in the society, and it is reinforced intentionally by the system. Black people and non-whites in general, which would include Irish and Italians in this point, live to forever be under the boot of the master race, and to be happy about having a place in the world at all. Their entire history, culture, and unique visage being erased, their genes simply being recycled to create another low caste of semi-morons to prop up the elites. The New World is maintained through strict, unchanging, and never-ending control. The rigid, immovable status quo. Soma, the drug that is prevalent throughout the novel, is part of the backbone of the society. Eternal labor isn't viable, so the population must have free time, and as such, they can spend their money. But it allows an uncontrollable factor of randomness into each person's life. What if they are upset, or angry, or impatient? What if they want to go on vacation, to relax, or take some time off? Then there is Soma, a drug with seemingly no downsides, instantaneous results, and easy to use that is available to all classes. It irons out anything that the system couldn't make optimally pleasant. It makes you calmer, more patient, and just plain happy. Afterwards, you feel refreshed, and it seems to be non-addictive. But there is a dark side to Soma. Soma kills you. Every citizen of the New World enjoys a life of youth and happiness, and then drops dead at 60. Before their bodies can start to deteriorate and slowly become what is seen as a burden on society, or possibly a threat, they die. A reason is never given, but it is hinted at. Soma kills Linda very quickly. She dies within a month or so of returning to London through taking endless amounts of Soma. I suspect that within Soma is a poison, a treatment of chemicals that latches onto the body's vital organs, and upon an unknown set of circumstances that coincide with the person turning 60, it terminates them. Another method of control, population control. But more than that, is that it is addictive. Linda is so withdrawn from Soma that she becomes depressed for decades, and overdoses on it when she returns, becoming a babbling shell on eternal holiday. When John, in his grief, takes away the Delta's Soma, it causes them to become quite violent, not just to himself, an outsider, but to Helmholtz, an alpha among alphas. Their addiction is so strong, so inert within themselves, they can override some of their conditioning as it threatens what has become a basic need for them. Soma is appropriately named. The word is Greek, and it means the body. Just the body. No mind, no soul, just the physical vessel. Soma helps keep the people as soulless mounds of flesh to be directed and extorted. It is another cog in the machine that drives this machine of the future nowhere. It keeps the status quo. And the Alpha class, more than any other, are expected to be exemplars of the social conduct, even at the cost of their own personal happiness. This shows that this world hasn't perfected happiness yet, since some people must still make conscious sacrifices for the whole. And yet, throughout all this repeated phrasings of hypnopedia, genetic manipulation, and consistent societal indoctrination, there are slivers of humanity in this cast. Bernard initially eschews social norms, wanting to be different for a reason that isn't simply being a runt, and looks for ways to experience life differently than others. To try and wait for pleasure, to gaze in an open sky and simply be without distraction or consumerism. Lenina, who at first cried at having to sit and stargaze, found herself looking up at the moon when she was longing for John, taking Soma when she was being bedded by a celebrity to get through it, something inconceivable to her at the beginning of the book. Helmholtz finds a ceiling for what can be enjoyed in life and wants more than what can be offered him, desires to experience something new rather than someone new. He creates poetry, which he is chastised for but adores and is exhilarated when John shares his poetry with him. He wants to push the boundaries, he wants to make something new and wholly original, something of his own. He is an artist who wants to finally create something. The director, Tomakin, an exemplar of the system, finds himself reminiscing about Linda, who he lost so long ago, which is considered a serious social taboo as he is thinking about the past and focusing on another person too much. He is so affected by this he has nightmares about it. Even Mustafa Mond is affected by this. When shown a new research paper on biology, he is fascinated by it and its advances that it could make to science, but laments that it is not accounted for under the way society is structured. He who propagates the system suffers under it too. Brave New World is a world that seeks to stamp out human suffering and, if necessary, human endeavor in all aspects. It only requires a stable society. As such, it must control its population down to their very inner beings. But these peaks into humanity, some because of or enhanced by interactions with John, show that the human spirit still lingers. It isn't quite snuffed out yet. That perhaps there is hope, or doom, depending on your view, for humanity yet. This book leaves no stone unturned for addressing human nature and how it developed into this manimal farm. If a woman gets the instinct to want a baby, they get a pregnancy substitute, where their system is awash in the chemicals to facilitate the need to move on. This is required for every woman when she becomes 21. The need of adventure, fear, or rage can be subdued with a violent passion surrogate, which is mandatory for all citizens once a month. Mustafa Mond and John's debate at the end of the book is one of the most cynical, yet also optimistic, and yet again terrifying looks at the human condition. John, looking for a place for his ideals in this world, and Mustafa Mond smacking down every one of them calmly and with the experience of a teacher talking down to an uppity student. It also has a timeless aspect to it, because while it's missing a lot of things we have that they should have, like phones or the internet or nuclear power, it can all in-universe be explained away thanks to Mustafa Mond and the controllers not allowing dangerous new ideas to get out and keeping the world stable. Loneliness and finding our place in the world is present in most of the characters. Bernard feels like he doesn't have the life he deserves and blames society for his appearance and loneliness. Helmholtz feels unfulfilled, unable to connect with anyone as they all seem to blur together. He can't be who he wants to be, feel what he wants to feel, as there is no one who understands him, which is echoed in John, but to an even more extreme case. He is a true fish out of water, and he is suffocating in a land so alien, so foreign from anything approaching genuine human interaction, that he feels he must take his own life, as this place was his last chance. The reservation he lived in didn't accept him. He never felt a true, genuine, loving experience that was equally reciprocated in his entire life. And that's really sad. And Lenina, as the book goes on, becomes more and more confused and focused on this one man in her life who made her feel something new. Finding our place in this world, by not only finding a place we can be comfortable and content in, the people we encounter and the person we are, is the source of conflict in this book. For when Bernard is finally feeling like a rebel, when John is crafting a bow, when Helmholtz writes poetry, these are the moments these characters feel true, actual, deep, and significant happiness. Finally, there is the reservation itself. It's pretty clever. There is this little patch of land that is clearly not the finest earth around, that the native inhabitants have been corralled into by an invading force. The Native Americans there are regular people. They aren't conditioned. They have dreams, aspirations, love and despise one another. They are culturally rich and filthy. rubbish strewn everywhere. They practice numerous faiths, perform traditional ceremonies, and spend time together truly bonding over something that is meaningful and difficult. The point is that the reservation is us. All of us. It's our world, our culture, attempted to condense it into a small area that it was never expected they could flourish in. Them being Native American is a sign that if we do not learn from the tragedies and mistakes of the past, we are doomed to repeat it. As a native Irishman, I would like to thank the Choctaw Nation for their support during the Irish famine. In a time when we were really treated like second-class citizens and forced to give up our own food while we starved, you were an ally, and for this, we are eternally grateful. However, there is some criticism I have for this book, sopping as it is from the tongue bath I've been giving it all video. The story is told in a straight line, but it's kind of all over the place with the characters. After the intro, we meet Bernard, who seems to be the main character, but then at the halfway point, we switch to John for most of the rest of the book. Bernard falls to the side, and even his worst nightmare of being sent off to the isolated island isn't give much page time, despite it being the final fate of the character we follow the most in the book. Which is emblematic of a larger issue. The book is more interested in the world it's created and telling you about it than the characters that inhabit it. I understand and maybe even agree with it on a more casual read, but taking the time to make this video really got me invested in these characters. Helmholtz deserves an entire book to himself. The director having an emotional connection to Linda, insomuch as he reminisced sadly about her disappearance, to have him drop out of the story after they reunite for the first time is another disappointment. At the end of the day, this might be a catch-21 situation. If he had spent more time on the characters, maybe I would have felt the story was bloated, because it feels a very comfortable length where it is right now. There is so much of this book I could cover. So many little moments of character and world building, like Lenina complaining of being at the bottom of a hill makes her feel small, the minutiae of how the conditioning makes some classes want to go to the countryside for the sports, but also hate the countryside so they don't spend too long there. The language used to describe people is often medical or mechanical, like calling pregnancy viviparity. The attempts at accelerating aging for the lower class as they only need physical ability, not mental. How the entire society could actually just be as efficient, giving people more time off, but says it would be pointless to do so. But I must draw the line somewhere. This is a work of art, an existential horror that pulls at the very notions and reasons we have for struggling through life. That happiness, true, unending happiness, is a desecration of all that makes life worth more than just living day to day. It is in pain, frustration, fear, lust, and sorrow through which we divide much of what separates us from base animals. For that is what the people of the New World are, animals that are taken care of, used, and discarded by their master, society. They don't live to prop each other up, only to enjoy themselves and die, leaving nothing in their wake. Not a grave, a note, or even a memory in another person. But we can't simply deny happiness outright like John does, or we become as monsters. Angry and alone, hating ourselves and everyone else, existing only as a rebellion against the perverted notion that happiness must be all-encompassing, devouring all that makes us human. John ends up hating the idea of happiness, of contentment, that life must be suffered through. But this rigid dogma is his downfall, as he is only human. He fails and is crushed by his guilt. If you haven't read this book, I know I spoiled the plot, but it is such a joy to read. I actually had an even better time rereading it so I could take in even more of the nuance. The interaction between the characters and their environments and how the world informs that is incredible. The book is awash with rhetoric, philosophy, and memorable quotes. There is no utopia, no world where we can be happy all the time in this life, because then we wouldn't be who we are meant to be. We are durable, strong, and resourceful. We seek happiness as a goal, not as a lifestyle. We live in it, and when it leaves us, we seek it out again, against everything the world throws at us, even through other people and with other people. And on the other side of it, we aren't the same person. Change is hard. It hurts. It's unstable, and it may be our downfall. But there is good in it. We evolve, becoming more than we thought possible, both as a person and a society. We have and must continue to strive towards the brave new world. But woe will we be if we ever arrive there. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time on Dystopium when we discuss the burning point of paper in Fahrenheit 451. Or Celsius 232.